let's actually go ahead and turn on the good audio. Let's do it. Boom, good audio. That's the difference when I'm recording on the mic on top versus the mic down here. A couple of people reached out to say how thankful they were that they found out a little bit more about wage theft so that they could actually talk to their employer about what they saw going on. And a number of people also just straight up was like, how could this much money be being taken? Like, how is that possible? So there are a few different ways that wage theft happens, and you can find these out on the internet, but let's just put them in a video for people. Number one, probably the top way that money gets stolen through wage theft is doctoring, like your manager asking you to do things so that you don't get paid overtime, to move stuff. And this happened to me when I worked at Walmart, and this wasn't what the wage theft settlement was about, but like there would be times when I would have already worked. I've been clocked in for 36 hours, and then I had more than 4 hours scheduled, and my manager would give me these sort of like nudges to be like, you can't go overtime this pay period. We can't have you going overtime, but you do still have to work all of the hours that you're scheduled. And so that sort of like put it on me to figure out like, what does that mean? Does that mean I have to get all my work done and then clock out early? Or does that mean that I have to clock out early and then keep working? How do we actually fix this problem? And like me being a college student, I was like, what do you mean? I'm going to work the amount of hours that you asked, like that I'm scheduled for, and I'm going to punch in and punch out at all the same times. And I just didn't do it. But I remember having this conversation with my manager who was like, you're going to go into overtime and you can't. And I was like, but I'm going to punch in and out when I arrive and leave from work. So I kept doing that. But like, he did say that to me. And that's wild because, and so this is part of like the structure of how wage theft gets, like, you don't know who's actually doing the stealing because my manager's manager told him that he couldn't have, he can't have more than a certain amount of overtime being billed to the store. And that manager's manager is also putting pressure. So like ultimately who did the bad thing? That's a big way. Doctoring time cards to avoid overtime. And I don't know how overtime rules work in other places, but in America, if you go over 40 hours a week, you get time and a half. And that is a big way that money gets stolen from people. But that's certainly not the only one. And also, it's really important to note that a lot of wage theft happens at companies that aren't huge, and there's no way to police it. Like with Walmart, you can get enough people together that you can actually do a lawsuit that pays for everybody's time. And by everybody, I mean also like the lawyers who are doing it, because if you're trying to get $1,000 for like one person or $5,000 for 5 employees, like there's just not enough money there. Like that like, and frankly, this shouldn't be the jobs of private attorneys. This should be a law enforcement thing. And it is, and like there are law enforcement officers who do work on this, but like, so another thing that happens is like you don't get paid, you get told not to clock in until a certain thing happens. So you're supposed to arrive at work at 6, but for the first 30 minutes of work every day, that's a time where you're having a meeting and you're going to talk about what you're going to do that day. You're getting into your work clothes, your et cetera. Like who knows what you are doing at that point. But so like what people find when they come and investigate is like there's a lot of people not getting paid for 30 minutes of work per day, and that adds up. It's huge. Like it's in an 8-hour workday, if you're only getting paid 7.5 hours a day every day 50 weeks a year, then that's a lot of money. So that's another way that wage theft happen. Tip stealing, also some employers will collect all of the tips and only pass out 50% of the tips. That's called working off the clock. It basically means working but not getting paid for it. In some situations, you have money getting deducted from your paycheck, and this is confusing for people. So a thing to remember that a lot of wage theft happens in situations where employees are like super marginalized. Like they might not speak English at all. They might not speak English well. They might be working on work visas and not want to jeopardize that. They might be working in the country illegally. They might be undocumented. And so for clarity, undocumented workers are still covered by American laws, even though they are working here illegally. Like there are multiple violations from that employer. One is employing people who are not authorized to work in the US. But that is separate from not treating them the way that American labor laws say you should treat them. Things like deductions from pay stubs, like they say, we're going to pay you minimum wage, but then we're going to reduce your wage to pay into something. That might be like your food allowance, your living expenses, or just like making stuff up to get below minimum wage. Wage theft also happens when companies set up shop and then they stop existing. And so sometimes a company will exist for 6 months, and then that last month they go out of business at the end of the last month and don't pay that last pay period. Sometimes people don't get paid for like their training, and the employer will be like, "Oh no, this is normal. You don't get paid during training." But you have to be being paid. Sometimes, like, it's okay to get paid less during training as long as it's above the minimum wage. But it is not okay to not pay people while they are doing on-the-job training, like they're working. Sometimes when a worker quits, the employer won't pay them for their last pay period. So if you quit, an employer will say, like, you quit, we're not going to pay you for the last 2 weeks you've been working, or the last week you've been working. So that's another way that wage theft happens. A lot of it is also misclassification of an employee. So saying someone is a contractor when they're actually an employee, and that, like, if they are an employee, then you need to be paying into unemployment, you need to be paying into Social Security and all that stuff. And so the worker's paycheck looks the same, like the same amount to them, but they aren't being paid all of the benefits that they should be being paid. Also, this happens when you pay an employee off the books completely. If you are paying under the table, so not reporting the income to the IRS, that is also wage theft, because you are not paying the benefits that worker deserves under the law of the United States of America. So there are lots of different ways that wage theft happens, which is why it is a squirrely problem and it is difficult to trace. It also happens it tends to happen a lot from it also tends to happen like a little. It's in terms of financial crimes, in terms of property crime, it tends to be a little bit from a lot of people. So a person might, over the course of a year, lose over $1,000, but in an individual pay period, it doesn't look like a lot, because you're not multiplying it by 50. Or 25 or whatever if you're getting paid every 2 weeks. Also, a huge one is making people work through breaks. This is actually what I got my wage theft settlement for. That was like, oh, we're gonna like get up to your overtime. So if you cannot take a lunch break today, we'll be able to get all your work done. The store is really understaffed right now, etc. Like, don't take that break, but mark down that you did. That's what wage theft looks like. For you in your own life, for other people, if you are ever aware of how other people in your life are being treated by their employers. These are things that, one, you can go to your supervisor and be like, this is illegal and you need to be careful about it, because like you could get in a lot of trouble if you feel empowered to do that, which of course most people don't. And two, you can go to wagetheft.org or a number of other places and report what's happening, and there may be attorneys in your area who work specifically on this kind of thing and recognize that it's not like, this isn't how they're going to get rich, but this is like an important thing to protect people who need protection. So thank you for caring about that and being curious about it. So really makes me mad.